Last October, I returned to Elgin, to the Nightmare Alley for Nightmare on Chicago Street. Judy contacted me and asked me if I would be able to be the Mad Doctor again. And I said, sure, of course. And so I started, I went around to the spirit store in Joliet to look at the props that they have. You know, they always have like a pretty good selection of weapons and props and whatnot, and see if anything catches my attention. And this year they actually had a drill. It was a battery operated toy drill, basically. It wasn't as realistic looking as I would have liked it to have been, but it was and that sparked my imagination. A few years back in my writers group, for one Halloween, we had to write these 2-sentence horror stories. And one of the ones that I wrote was, I need to get some disturbing thoughts out of my head. You think a 3/8 drill bit would do the trick? Well, this wasn't anywhere near the size of a 3/8 drill bit, but I still liked it, and I got it, and I checked in at Habitat for Humanity, and I went down and reported to makeup, and I asked them, I told them, I said, could you put drill holes on the sides of my head, around like on my temples? And they said sure, they could do that. They're really, the makeup people there are really awesome. You can just tell that they do really good work, making everybody up to look like zombies and mad doctors and whatnot. And I got to work with the old crew from last year. They were back. They really do an awesome job. Everybody there does. It's just I'm really surprised and honored to be a part of this thing, to have been a part of this thing for the last few years, because they really do a good job of it. Russ Gemmin, he was back, and he was outside giving us a pep talk and psyching us all up and everything. And Judy had to go to the ER because her blood pressure was high. I don't know, I guess, putting this thing together and coordinating everything and everybody, I guess it can be kind of stressful on a person, and her blood pressure went up, and so she had to be sent to the hospital. But before they took her away, Russ led us in a couple of loud cheers for her, and she said she heard them, and this is the message she sent me. It warmed my heart to hear that cheer before leaving for the ER. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Judy, and I'm glad you're doing better. She is doing better, yes. Please do take good care of yourself, because you take good care of us. I forgot, before all this happened, I stopped by again in the Blue Box Cafe to get something to drink and get a bite to eat before I got my makeup done. And they had some new drinks there in the cafe, 3 new drinks, and I got all 3. And I looked over, and sure enough, somebody was there waiting in line, dressed as the 13th Doctor. She was standing there, and I just turned around and I looked at her and I said, I promise to give you a chance. And she was very sweet about it. She said, you promise? And I said, yeah. And I said, just so long as you understand that my response to you will be different. And she nodded. She understood. Like I said, I said this in a previous video, I don't have a problem with a female doctor. I really don't. It's just everything that has been surrounding this one that has just turned me off. Am I angry? Am I offended that there was a female doctor? No, of course not. What I was disappointed. She just doesn't... There's just no depth to her performance. It's just all surface and no substance. It has nothing to do with her being a woman. There's just nothing there. I did want it to work. I did want her to work, and she just wasn't doing it. And yes, I'm disappointed. But enough about that. So I got to go back, and I got to go and see where we were going to be stationed at. It was like this medical facility again, and they would put the groups of people into 2 separate rooms in the front. One of the doctors was there in front in one section, and the nurse was in the other, one of the nurses. and they had to coordinate to make sure that both groups didn't go back into our area at the same time. So they had to make sure the whichever group went first got clear, and then they'd send the other group in, and they'd come back and send them to us in the autopsy room, and we'd be there, and and we'd do our bits and send them on through into the next area. Yeah, I was there. I was made up, and I had my drill holes on the sides, on the temples of my head, and I had on my my bloody lab coat, which was still bloody from last year, and I added some of my badges and buttons to the front of the coat. I had my Svengoolie for President button that I got at Wizard World, and I also added on 2 Miskatonic University pins I got from the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, the Sanity Level Meter, and the Halsey School of Medicine badge. Some people have they leave reviews on the website about the badges, and some people don't like the fact that the dials on the Sanity Meter, they don't stay steady. They keep changing and moving. From my perspective, I think that works perfect, because I always make sure it starts out at the top on 99, and I always look to see what number it's at the end of the night, because I think that works. That works in my favor, because the buttons, the dials keep moving and the numbers keep shifting, and I always start out at 99, and this year at the end of the night I was down to 11. I think it worked. I know it's not something that people probably notice, but I notice it, and I think it adds. I think it adds to the effect. If only in my own head. I was there and in the autopsy room, and this other nurse was there, and this one fellow, this really big hulking fellow, he was there. He was like the head surgeon. The nurse would call out in the front section to make sure that her group didn't go in at the same time as the doctor's group in the other section. And she would yell out, "Doctor, are you ready?" And I kept thinking she was talking to me. And we'd have another group in there, and we were doing our routine with them, and she'd yell out, "Doctor, are you ready?" And I yelled out, "No!" And I'd scare some of the people in there, and I'd be there. I was there. I had my drill, and I'd go up to one of the ladies there, or a lady who was in the group or whoever, and I'd say, "Hi, could you do me a solid? I'm trying to get rid of a migraine." And I'd have her the drill bit in one of the holes on the sides of my head, and she'd squeeze the trigger and drill it, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's perfect. Yeah." I tell them I was trying to get rid of a migraine, and some of them were actually pretty sympathetic, but they'd pretend to drill the hole on the side of my head, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's it, perfect. Don't forget the other side." And they drill on the other side, and I'm like, "Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much." Yeah, and this one group got in there, and the guy playing Boris, he was doing his bit, and he looked him over. "Oh yes, you have the infection, so bad, but he's okay. Boris will take care of you." And I looked over, and this one guy he was inching his way away from us. He was like on the other end of the group, and he was kind of inching away from us. And I saw him, and I was like, "Hey, where are you going?" And I would have chased him around the autopsy table if he wasn't moving so dang fast. I mean, this guy, he just like zoomed right around the autopsy table, and I'm trying to chase after him, and he's just not having it. I'm like, "Great, we've got Jesse Owens in here." They go through the next part, and we all just cracked up laughing, and the next group would come in, and finally the girl that was dressed as the 13th Doctor came in. Now, if they do have this one rule that if your friends or family come in, you're not supposed to acknowledge them. You're like, "Hey, how you doing?" But if they're dressed like certain characters, you can interact with them like they're the character. That works. So she came in, she was the 13th Doctor, and I just took one look at her. I said, "You got any jelly babies?" And she's like, no. And Boris was doing his spiel, and the nurse in the front goes, "Doctor, are you ready?" And I yelled out, "No!" And I turned around and looked at the third doctor, and I said, "You sure she wasn't talking to you?" And they went out, and some guy came in. He was dressed as Ash from The Evil Dead, and I saw he came in, and I took one look at him, and I said, "Groovy!" And he burst out laughing. And then some other lady came in, and she had on those, what do you call them, like the footy pajamas with the hoods. It was Sully from Monsters, Inc. And so she came in there, she had her Sully footy pajamas on, and I took one look at her, and I pointed at her and said, "Kitty!" And she grinned, and Boris was going through his spiel about how they were all contaminated and infected, and I looked over at Sully, and I said, 2319, 2319! I couldn't remember. I was struggling to remember what that code number was, that code was when somebody got infected with the movie, and I couldn't remember what it was. And finally it hit me. 2319, 2319, and she grinned, and yes, we did have a good night. And some groups that came in were more lively than others. Some of them got into it more than others. This one fellow I had like backed up against the wall, and I had my drill, and I had this big grin on my face. He was backed up against the wall, and he was like, I'm good, dog, I'm good. And I had this big grin on my face, and I had my drill up in his face, and oh yeah, and somewhere out there on the interwebs, there's actually footage of the inside of my mouth. This one group came in, and they had their phones out, and they were taking pictures, and I had my drill, and I had my mouth open, and I was like, ah! So they took pictures of the inside of my mouth. I have yet to find them, but they're out there somewhere. Those of you who want to satisfy your curiosity and see what the inside of my mouth looks like. I always have a good time. I'm always glad I'm always glad that I'm able to do that. That was the third year I've done it, and it's always been good for me. And everybody involved, the cast and the crew members, the makeup, set design, they all do a really, really wonderful job. And I say this, those of you out there, if you see this, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, you guys are awesome. You really and truly are. I'm always proud and pleased to be a part of your group. Sometimes, I do admit, sometimes I'm not as... I may seem a little standoffish at times, but that's, only because I get into my, I'm trying to stay focused, I guess. I always enjoy it every year. These last years I've been doing it, and I'll keep doing it as long as they want me to come. I'll do it. You keep wanting me to do it, and I will keep doing it. And I thank you. I really and truly do.